Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the January 7th work session, our first work session of the year. We have a short but very broad agenda today, talking about our educational technology, the project update, what we're going to look at, the most, I guess, popular topic is on mobile phones, but we're going to look at all of technology and how the district uses technology in the district. So, Dr. Wilson-Norman, I'll turn it over to you for any introductions and to get us started.
Thank you very much, and Happy New Year, everyone. Today, we are excited to introduce an important initiative that focuses on revisiting and refining our district's approach to cell phones and personal devices, as well as a long-term educational technology strategies. Today, we're going to delve deeply into cell phones and how they are utilized within the classroom. This project represents a collaborative effort across multiple departments, including policy, technology, and academics. Our shared goal is to foster meaningful conversations across the district that provide data and insights to inform effective and equitable policies. That we will engage a wide range of stakeholders, including school leaders, teachers, families, and students, to gather a diverse perspective. Today, we will start with our school board and thinking through multiple aspects of the usage of cell phones in classrooms. We are partnering with RTI, the Research Triangle Institute, and I have with us Mike Martin, who has been our partner in helping us work through our development and conducting our focus groups. Mike Martin and his team have supported us previously in working our strategic plan, so they're very familiar with our district. Their expertise will be invaluable in helping us design data-driven and an inclusive process. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Martin to get us started in today's activities.
Great. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. So I am going to kind of go through about 15 minutes of sort of framing our conversation, give you all a sense of, and I think Dr. Robinson shared in a policy meeting earlier at the end of last year, the direction that we're going, and so we really want to use this time to kind of talk through the essential challenges in thinking about a cell phone policy and really get your input in thinking about what information you need to make to deliberate and make a good choice about the policy that would come into effect in the 25-26 school year. So it's really about thinking about gathering the right information. So I think one of the things that we hope to walk away from with today is a sense of the information that you will need, because this is admittedly a challenging topic. There's a lot of emotion connected to it. They're a big part of all of our lives, cell phones, I mean, and so we just really want to use this time to get the information from you all. So for about the first 15 minutes, I'm just going to go through some framing material. So as I do that, I would ask you guys to sort of gather questions, gather ideas, take notes as you go through, and then the large portion of the work session will be a work session where we are going to pose some core questions to y'all about what information you'll need to to feel like you can make a good common decision about a policy across the district. So that's kind of the agenda, and I'll go through it in a minute here, the actual agenda. But I just want to start out by just framing kind of the reason that we're revisiting our approach to technology. So the first part of it is really about, through the pandemic, every school district, including Wake County, had this very major move to online learning, which meant buying a lot of devices. It meant basically becoming one-to-one, no matter where the district was. And so one of the streams of work, and we're going to talk about this less today, but it will be part of this work, is thinking about our approach to technology that is district provisioned technology. The second part, and the part that we're going to spend the most time talking about today, are cell phones and personal devices and what policies that we might want to adopt, what adaptations to current policies we might want to take as a board. One of the things I will say is that as we think about all of this stuff, the core thing we're driving at is student learning and well-being. And both of those things are tied together as we think about technology, the use of technology. So I want us to keep that in mind as we go through the process. Just in terms of our timeline, the major things that we're driving towards on the cell phone side would be a revised policy that is in place for the 25-26 school year. So that is what we're going to spend the lion's share of our time talking about and getting your input on today. The second part of it, the school-issued instructional technology, because that it requires a lot of purchasing and time, what we want to do with that is think about implementing for the 26-27 school year. Because right now, when we think about refurbishing things like that for the 25-26 year of school, that's taking place right now. So a reasonable timeline for that is to have a revised approach, and for the board to inform that revised approach in preparation for the 26-27 school year. So those are our two major objectives. We're going to spend the time today talking about cell phones, in part because the timeline is quicker in terms of when we want to implement this, and it's immediately important to students, families, and educators. We know there's a lot of feelings around this, and there's a lot of implications, and it's complex, so we really want to spend our time on that today. So our aims really today are to gather board input to develop a clear and effective cell phone personal device policy that supports student learning and well-being. We're going to talk about timeline at the very end when we close out the work session. And then secondly, and part of this will be gathering information, but as we return to you in March and April, we want to basically make sure that we have a good analysis of other policies, cell phone policies, to help you with your deliberation. So that is as we do this work together, that's a secondary goal. We're not going to do that as much today because we really want to make sure there's alignment between what you need as a policy-making body and the information that we provide. So I'm just going to go through a quick 10-minute framing. And I want to do this in part because I want to give us some common things to refer back to as we engage in this conversation. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through what we've identified as 8 kind of understandings about cell phones. And these are in the PowerPoint in part because we want to ask the question, do we collectively agree to these? So I'm going to present the understandings, and then we're going to spend some time actually in small groups discussing and getting feedback. So we're going to ask you, what do we need to adjust? What do we need to add? It's totally fine if there's something that you as a board member actually disagree with or argue with, but we think it'll be helpful to align the work of staff in helping gather data to present the understandings and have you guys discuss them, and we're going to have you record on a couple sheets of paper that we'll be able to kind of return to you in our process in March and in April. And it will help inform what we do to get you guys the right research and information. So just one of the ways I wanted to sort of frame this and is to just think about it across the sort of state, district, school, and classroom level, right? We know that what happens day to day in the classroom is going to be the thing that matters. But I just wanted to give you a quick sort of overview of our understanding of what the landscape is around cell phones when we think at the state, district, school, and classroom level. So first, at the state level, one of the sort of reliable sources is the Education Commission of the States. They've done some research, and basically there are some states that have taken steps to issue cell phone policies. Well, Louisiana, Virginia, they've issued those policies, but ultimately a lot of those policies are notionally directional, but they really are up to the districts to make the choice. Of note as well, in the last legislative session in North Carolina, there was a Senate bill that was out that did not make it out of session in 24-25. It may come back, But that was really legislation to study cell phone policies, right? So it's possible that that would be a part of our sort of deliberation. At the district level, typical cell phone policies are really like focused, I would say, at a very simple level, at saying, by and large, cell phones should not be out during instruction. That's typically what district-level policies are targeting, and typically they have exceptions. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But, and there's some variability in terms of restrictiveness and flexibility, and we have a little continuum that will help you guys think about this as you go into your small groups. At the school level, there's variabilities of approaches, and we've done some preliminary work in just looking across Wake County at posted policies. And there's definitely variability. I think we're at the place where we want to sort of verify whether the posted policies are the policies in action, right? Because obviously with something like this, it may be somewhat iterative. But there's variabilities in approaches, but commonly, there's a sense that during instruction, you don't want the cell phone out. But there's variability. Some folks have, red, yellow, green. Some really encourage students not to bring their cell phones to school. But there's some level of variability. That said, most folks understand that during instruction, unless there's a reasonable instructional reason, they're stored away. And then finally, obviously at the classroom level, and I think this is one thing for us to sort of collectively think about, is, we want to make an implementable policy that supports learning in the classroom. And as we get into the understanding, one of the things that we'll talk about is we want to make sure as we develop a policy that it keeps learning and well-being at the center, and isn't first and foremost about policing cell phones and creating, the enforcement of it can become a challenge. So we want to kind of collectively think about that. So with that, I'm going to head into the sort of 8 understandings that we've laid out. And again, as I present these, take notes, because when we get into conversations, we're going to want you guys to be thinking about, do I agree with these? Is there nuance that is not here in this? Because I think if we can sort of narrow in on a common set of beliefs and a common set of understandings, it will help us to design a policy that we feel good about and achieves our aims for students. So I'm just going to talk through these, and then we'll sort of head into the sort of smaller work groups and then the overall conversation. So the understandings that, as we've laid them out, the first one is that at a fundamental level, focused attention is essential for effective learning. So if we divide attention, which can definitely happen with cell phones and personal devices, that can present a significant challenge to student success. So that is one of the essential, I think, core things that's driving a lot of districts and driving a lot of schools within Wake County to think about how they restrict the use of cell phones. The second part is that, and this I think is really, really important as we do this work, because you all are such a big district. We're talking about 180 schools?
99.
Yeah, so it's a ton of schools, it's a ton of classrooms within those schools. Schools are doing this work right now. They're doing it in ways that are somewhat common, but there's also variability. And I think that most districts have taken these steps to revise their cell phone policies in the pursuit of consistency and in the pursuit of improving student learning. So I think the understanding too is that schools are actively addressing this, and there are some commonalities, right? But there are definitely differences, and we haven't done the full analysis of all the posted policies, but there definitely is variation in terms of how people are implementing this. And of course, very big differences when it comes to like high school versus elementary school. Those represent differences. The third thing is that cell phones and personal devices should generally remain out of sight and unused during instructional time, except in specific approved circumstances. In our sort of survey of current schools, that seems to be the case. And most policies that we've reviewed thus far seem to allow for an instructional exception. That is very much connected to understanding number 4, which is that any policy will count for appropriate exceptions. And, those are quite variable, but can be things like, obviously, instructional needs, medical needs, specific learning accommodations, and principal-approved situations, while maintaining overall consistency. So these two things, understanding 3 and 4, are complicated, right? So as we do this work and as we get into March and April and are actually looking at language of policy, I expect the sort of thinking about how we achieve number 3 and allow for number 4 is going to be a central part of our conversations. And of course, we'll look at many examples of other folks who have done this and what they have learned about it. The second set of understandings is, and I won't say too much about this one, but that cell phones and personal device policies will vary by grade level. So I think as we think about the policy, we imagine that it will take different forms at different grade levels for obvious reasons. Understanding 6 is basically that enforcing policies can be challenging. And as we think about this, I think for us, because of how many schools and how many different implementations there are, I think as we set policy, we want to make sure that it is as prescriptive as you all need it to be, right? There's going to be a central conversation about how much is centralized, right? And towards the end, I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the specifics, decision-making, but we want to make sure that we create something wherein enforcement doesn't become its own problem, which I think is definitely a possibility, right? So as we think about the degree to which, we want to devolve power to the local levels, decision-making to the local level, I think that will be really important, because what we don't want to do is create, a channel for a lot of disciplinary actions. At the same time, we know this is important for learning, right? Understanding number 7 is that, and this one I think is super, super important, is that the policy itself cannot be a complete solution. And I think one of the things that, I think we want to talk about as we do this work is what sort of training and support families and counselors and teachers get to address student needs in terms of mental health. Because I think as we think about policy, I think a lot about, instructional time and where and when they can be used. But as we all know, there's big questions about the impact of cell phones, social media on student mental health and well-being. And obviously this gets challenging because that is also the purview of parents and families, right? But we do know we want to be able to support through the policy, instruction, and well-being, but also recognize that there needs to be continued support. And the last one, and I just put it down because, in part because this is because technology changes so quickly, because a lot of other districts are doing this and will learn things from it, we imagine this policy will need to be returned to and updated. We do not think that this is a thing that is fixed in place and would be, sort of in place for, 10 years, right? That just does not seem feasible given the rate of change about how and when technology is used, the advancement of research, and what we will learn about this work. So those are our basic understandings, and we're going to ask you guys to spend some time talking about them. I have 3 more slides, and then we're going to kind of jump into small group discussion and then larger group questions and discussion. So the one sort of, I think, kind of conceptual thing is to think about, and this may be helpful as we get into discussions about this and as we think about the decisions, the actual language of the policy later this spring. We think there's sort of kind of a more restrictive manifestation of this and a more flexible manifestation of this. And just to give you guys some sense of what on the more restrictive side that might mean, not at school at all, right? There's some places where it's like the message is don't bring it to school, right? Or often stored away, or on the person to stored away. But as we all know, like you can have your cell phone on, and if it buzzes in your pocket, part of your brain's there, right? So the difference between often stored away and on person stored away. And then there's also a lot of districts, Chatham County is one example that is piloting this, that have these sort of pouches. They're doing it as a pilot, so that's a thing to consider as well. Obviously, with the pouches, there is definitely fiscal considerations, right? But there's also, and even in our first conversations, we met with the superintendent student advisory, and there's definitely cases right now in Wake County school to school where a kid can have it in the backpack, right? Or some teachers in the same building will require it to get put on the door. So there's that sort of difference. In the middle, it might mean, allowing it, and this is for middle and high school, during lunch, during passing periods, allowed on campus or allowed at approved times by teachers and administrators. And on the very more flexible end, it would really be set classroom to classroom. So that's just sort of a conceptual continuum for us to think about. And then finally, and these last two slides are not questions that we are going to answer today, but they are things for us to think about. And that is just, who will make the decision, right? So that's a fundamental thing that I think you all are taking on right now is, we will have a mandated district-wide policy. How specific will it be? It will allow some flexibility, but what flexibilities? These are the things that we will talk about over the course of the coming months. And then schools have that decision about what flexibility they offer. One of the examples in preparing for this that we talked about is music class. Cell phone is a great thing to tune an instrument, right? And so how do you think about, those kind of variabilities with also recognizing the potential challenges that can come with cell phones? And so there's the question of who, and I think that's one of the main things we're going to wrestle with here. Then there's the how and where personal cell phones and personal devices are stored and kept. Backpacks, silent or in the off position, in pouches in lockers, or in designated storage in the classroom. And then the sort of when, where, and why. And when and where, I think, kind of run together. But, for when, it's sort of during transitions, at lunch, before or after school, potentially not on campus at all. Where, you can use them on the entire campus, classroom when given permission, only in halls and lunchrooms, not in bathrooms, outside of the building, or not on campus at all. So there's this sort of fundamental question as well. And then I think the last part of this, and I think this is really, really important, is that we have done, just looking at some Pew research, there's an awful lot of support for cell phones. The majority of respondents in a Pew survey say they don't want cell phones in the classroom day to day. When you ask that question about should you have cell phones on campus, the support becomes much less, right? So a lot more parents are like, and this is totally understandable, I want to be able to contact my kid just for peace of mind reasons, also for practical reasons, pick up, that kind of thing. So at least that, and that's a very recent survey, I think it's October of 2024. So there's Americans in this survey support them not being out in the classroom, but by and large do not support the idea that I'm just not going to be able to contact my kid. And obviously that's complicated, but to this last question, when cell phones can be used, I think we need to think about ideas of contacting families in case of emergency. You could imagine for a more flexible policy for any reason, for instructional purposes or sort of predetermined health needs. So these are the sort of things that we believe we're going to have to wrestle with over time. So I really appreciate everybody sort of giving us some time to kind of just frame it, to have a common set of things that we can refer to as we move into the group. So what we are going to do for the next 45 minutes is we're going to actually break into 3 groups, and I'll tell you what the groups are, and we're going to have staff go with each of you, and we're going to ask you guys to use the deck that was presented, and we're going to ask you to really respond to 3 key questions. And basically, since this is the only item, so we have 45 minutes, we'll give you about 12 to 15 minutes per question, but then we want to allow for a solid 20 or 30 minutes for share outs of what you guys are thinking about your needs, any questions that you have, and then we'll close out just with a sense of our process in terms of gathering feedback. And again, just to remind you, like, we want you guys to help us think about what you need to feel like you can make a good decision about this. That's part of what today's purpose is. And I'll talk a little bit about the process that we and staff will use to gather feedback moving into the spring. So the 3 questions that we love you guys to think about, and Mary Claire, who's with me here, is going to has sheets that we'll use to record your thinking. So the first question is, like, sort of what key information do you need to guide your deliberation to action on cell phone personal device policies for 25-26? So I think that's really sort of thinking through what will help you make the most decisions. That could be what you need to know about current implementation within Wake County schools. It could mean what you need to know about analogous sized districts, CMS, whomever, and what action they're taking. Secondly, I think it's really, really important, because I do think this is a very emotionally infused topic. As you review the understandings that I previewed, what do you agree with, what do you argue with, and what needs to be added on and elaborated? So as you guys think in your groups, you know, if there's a part of this that you want to make sure you capture and that you would argue with or edit in some kind of way, we want that feedback to sort of sense where you are as a policy-making body. And then the last thing is, I think this, you know, more than anything, you all are elected representatives. So we really want to know, as you think about your role as being representative of families within the district, what input you're hearing from parents and educators that needs to be addressed by the policy, what needs to be addressed by schools, that sort of issue of centralization, right? How specific do we want to be based on the conversations you're having? And I think slide 12 and 13, which is the who, what, when, where, will be really helpful around that. So those are our 3 specific questions that we're going to break out into groups, and we'll have myself and other staff go with you in groups to have those discussions. We'll take I'll try to keep us on track, so we'll take 12 to 15 minutes per discussion. You guys get your ideas down, and then we'll have, we should have probably a solid 20 minutes to share out, so that you can share out as a group, so you can all hear where you are collectively, ask any questions, and then I'll close out with timeline. Okay? All right, so I think we're ready to move to our groups. So group 1 is going to be Stacy, Ms. Caulfield, Chair Hegarty, Ms. Rice, and then you are going to be right down here. Group 2 will be Drew and Shashi with Ms. Edmonds, Mr. Hershey, and Mr. Swanson. And Group 3 with Dr. Robinson will be Dr. Taylor, Ms. Mahaffey, and Dr. So Mary Claire is going to come around with the handouts, and we're going to spend about 12 minutes per question. I'll keep us on track. Make sure you're recording this. This will all be very valuable as we think about how we do this in March. Group 2, yeah, I think let's, yeah.
All right, where are we going?
Come down this way.
Group 2 is right here.
Yeah, maybe right here. You want to go to the other room? All right, we're going to go to the other room.
I can just give.
Come on, Wayne. We're taking a field trip.
Yes.
No, you can sit right here. Yeah. Happy New Year, y'all. Happy New Year to you.
Isn't that always the case?
Tell me.
Kelly, my pen down there.
Yes, sir.
You sit right next to Lynn.
We getting shushed or we getting gas?
I was going to say, that's a good question.
All right, so what key information
I need to know what teachers want, so I will hear from MCD. I need to know what teachers want, or their input, I'll phrase it. And I need to know what the other districts that have taken action, and what their results are,
Districts on North Carolina have been
what changes they've made, if any.
Some of these from the end of last year,
Just
some
their
from the school year. It'd be nice
results,
to see
basically, what their
Sort of
outcomes have been.
what similarly sized districts have done, what
Adjustments.
neighboring districts
What's worked, what hasn't worked.
Yeah.
Adjustments,
Yeah.
have gone. Have there been pros, cons, and especially like unanticipated results?
Folks on
Maybe they
information.
were expecting one thing, but they found. here's the
I've gotten
problem.
some feedback, so really all I
Or here's the
interested in
benefit.
hearing is from our most
Getting that information from the folks that have already started, would I think be really helpful in practical skills.
the last one and talked about the security, the cell phone provides. That's when going to the bathroom, I think that's helpful. But I also am of the mindset that I'm fine if I take the cell phone to the bathroom because
Trying to monitor that and police that sounds like a nightmare.
not only that, but
The bathroom.
that's where accidents can happen and stuff. So
And I've gotten feedback too. I had this as my discussion topic at my BAC in December, but that's not enough. I mean, that's a very small amount of people, even within my own district, let alone district-wide.
I was going to say the last thing is, and I've gotten some feedback from some principals, but I think it would be helpful for principals that have implemented different things to say whether they've had any issues with enforcement or discipline.
So I've spoken to quite a few of my principals as I go through and figure out what they're doing, and some of my principals are already doing a modest, I don't want to say ban, but there's some procedures in place.
Yep.
When Dr. Sexton were at Green Hope, they have the calculator thing that you store the little beans. Every little student, yes, the pouch is in bins, but the pouch is there. Every student has a number on their desk that is their assigned space for their cell phone, and at Green Hope there is no ticket if you leave the bathroom. It stays there because that's also a disruption of teaching and learning. We're trying to recenter the conversation. Carey High has a very similar thing. They use the pouches that you put in your binders for pencils and stuff. It's taped to the, or somehow it's connected to the chair, so therefore the students have that ability. As we were at West Carey Middle School, they have no cell phones at all. And so I would love to hear from those teachers, those principals rather, at whether it's a work session or talk about the lessons learned, the grows and grows that they face. So I think you're going to get a wide range of discussion from all the teachers. When I taught, I knew
Technology and
for
children
me,
younger and
I
younger
wasn't
using
teaching, I didn't care what you did with your cell phone. But
But
the
I want
moment
to ask you about asking
learning to play,
teachers
there
and
was a
focusing
mutual
only on the
understanding
teachers that have 5
that
years.
was not supposed to be out.
If the
But also
majority of our
see what
teachers,
schools are
vast
putting in their
majority of our
school improvement
teachers
plans.
have more than 5 years.
Because that is their
Shouldn't we also be getting their input into it?
not in their school
But
improvement
my
plans.
collective focus
I just want to explore that a little
how
bit.
they're managing.
But I'll say for me, as a student, I am definitely someone who I'm not for a very
Focus on how they
restrictive
want to do it.
piece because we also have students that will be
Time.
taken for transportation. We don't have our buses where we want it to be. So I would not want a kid to be penalized for trying to figure out how they're getting home.
And so while
Or if we
they're
have kids that have medical issues, and they're diabetic or something, and they're like that data, I don't want those students to be penalized. But then on the flip side, I don't want every student to say they have a medical emergency they need a second. So there has to be somewhere to go. I think luncheon, during lunch, that's the perfect place to unwind. But I also think as adults have to model that behavior as well.
I can tell you Broughton has, their policy is bell to bell, no cell. So they don't take it out even at lunch. I guess kids leave and go to lunch
Right, yeah.
and do it, and either way.
It's a little extreme.
How they're managing.
But she said they've not had any
She
issues.
says the first
They're not necessarily treated like contraband, right? In other words, students can have the cell phone on
Yes.
campus,
Right.
just not outdoors, right?
She says after that, devices go away.
That's pretty the Leadership Academy, the women,
She's setting
when they have
expectations. She
same
gives them
thing.
a moment. She integrates it how they handle it.
I think it's going to differ based on different parts of the district. It's more relaxed, more, I don't want to say we're relaxed, but I think depending on certain parts of our district and our community,
Because she's setting expectations
folks are going to show up and be a little bit different.
that they
I know a lot of your
can't use in
constituents
lab.
showed up
She
a
never
couple months ago and talked about the data and whatnot, and so
Would you be
I
open to
think folks
the
out in Western Wake that I represent are saying,
Bifurcated.
there should be something, but I still want to be able to have control and access my student
so that
when
you
they want to.
specifically
So
target the teachers within their 5 years, but you also do get the input of the teachers
I'm not
over
saying
5 years?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I just want to make sure.
No,
because-
I was just being specific.
Yeah, I don't think we should have them go to the, you can't even bring it on.
Information that you want, I guess,
Because
is
then
there
it
to
becomes
contrast.
contrast.
I don't think that's reasonable.
That's a common theme, I think, when I'm here.
For me, it's kind of about
Short of an
balance.
all-out ban.
I think educating families.
What are some examples,
some of the studies
both
that we
nationally,
know.
regionally, but also within the district?
We understand.
Maybe approaches and balanced approaches that's effective and enforceable.
I would be curious as to how many schools are actually already just doing
It's way all the way. I
basically.
don't think it's.
What's the current state of it?
You mean similar to Broughton's?
Well, like,
Or like you can't even leave within the
like most of the
No,
middle,
no, so.
most of the middle schools,
How many classrooms?
they serve.
Kind of deciding what works for them at the
I
moment.
think
Or
those
doesn't work.
principals would have data from their teachers that we
And I think educating.
that we can guide from, but I
What social media
think
does, it
just in this climate,
the articles,
safety
that's why
will be
increased by it, but
concerned.
did not really see the long out.
I think it would be a very,
Of our children.
I think we could lose market share if we were to do a full out, no cell phone ban, no cell phones whatsoever.
But they also grew up in homes.
I'm not in favor of that.
But I also like to know what some of these charter schools are doing in the area, to see what some of their plans are and how they're
You know, so knowing that it is.
Well, and I was gonna say, what you all maybe say,
And we're talking about.
what I've heard too, is I'm curious how well, you know, how parents are also following those policies, right? It's,
So
because
that's
that's
wonderful that the teacher
the
has.
whole situation, so how well are teachers implementing, how well teachers are parents following? Support, for sure, for whatever policy. For sure.
Respect and
Is
the
there a way
air
that we can start
about her. You know, I've had some teachers who didn't matter what they said.
teachers,
I love their
family
presence.
sign, but maybe sliding that information into them and saying, this is an agreement not just for your child, but for you and your child as well. Because it doesn't make any sense for us to have a policy if parents are not going to abide by it.
We can work with them, your courage.
That was something, I think Granville has,
Benefit for us.
over the last 2 years, it's not all out banned, but one of the components of that policy is the involvement of counselor or social worker. I think recognizing some of the research about the addictiveness of the cell phone itself, social media, but trying to incorporate proactive measures on the front end.
Are there any ones that have actually just banned it? Like, I haven't heard of any of them.
I don't know any local districts that have done that. I think nationally, there
Nationally,
are
yes.
schools and districts that absolutely have
South Carolina just
Outright bans.
outright bans.
I can't even bring it up.
Correct.
If it's 100% put it away, the kids
back
still have the phone.
first of this year.
Good luck enforcing that.
Well, and then
Well, and that was part of the premise in reading some of the research, like some of the researchers will say, if you try to have something in the right, and only if during instructional time or there's support accessibility exceptions, or there are arguments of harder just to enforce.
So there's one other piece on that, unless anyone else has any on that first.
We had a conversation about
Another piece of information that I'd like to have
And
in
there
the
was
policy.
a stoplight.
I'd like to have better understanding
Green meant
about
technology was
individual
okay, yellow
accommodation.
meant you had to get your teachers
So
consent.
if we have a policy,
Red was none
then
whatsoever.
when-
The problem with that was there was no
when
consensus.
when is an
There was a
accommodation
couple of teachers
allowed
that
and how
fully
is it?
enforced that, and it was.
So for example, if a student
What
with a
they
certain
did,
medical
So
condition,
if
they might
you
need
get upset with
access to
students when they're
it.
not
Whereas,
following that,
Right.
if
but if
teachers
it's
aren't
just,
being
well, if the
consistent,
parent asks for it, some parents might say, yeah, sure, my kid,
Throughout the
uses
board,
it
so
all the
I
time.
think that's gonna be
But
our
like,
big-
like a legitimate medical concern,
Because
like
students,
that's family.
if they were a student in Broughton and Broughton is having.
And then also one thing that I learned about at the
So
conference,
that's going to be some of
Or the bell rings.
and again,
first
I'd like to
block,
see
second block, and it's in the
another conversation, a little bit beyond just the use other technology, but how students are using, like our English language
all
learners,
parameters allowed.
are using their phones for translation, so that they can access other classes or instruction that may not have
It's not
a
something I'm
Spanish
interested
speaker.
in. I would still like to know what's happening.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
How is that
Is
looking?
that
How's
an
that going?
accommodation?
Yeah.
How would that be? So I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, to make sure that's.
How's it going?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm just curious.
And what do we mean by that? Right, is it more like what you described, where I don't have it on,
Bell to bell,
or it's in a
yeah.
pouch, you know?
To translate certain just simple words.
Literally, yeah.
We also have to realize smartwatch are a thing too, so are we going to put something?
And that's,
Yeah.
Personal device.
Shashi has brought that up. That's about cell phones. Yep, there's other types of devices.
Concussion.
and I think too, just based on the scans that we've done so far, is a lot of the bans, the more severe bans are just being implemented too, which may be a challenge in terms of finding,
To find out
to
how
find
it's
exactly
going.
how it's going, but we are speaking, we are lining up to speak with other districts and their leadership to talk with to see how things are going and talk about discipline and talk about those questions that we're raising. So we can at least get their input, and hear how things are.
What I'm concerned is that teaching and learning, teachers are becoming cell phone police versus being the educators that they're supposed to be doing. So how do we,
Other than
there's going to be another burden that's being placed on educators.
Right.
By saying now I have to
whatever you can find.
do all this other stuff, and now the cell phone police, and
Yeah.
I don't want to get cussed out when I have to compensate the cell phone. What support can we give these educators?
And in terms of thinking about a long-term plan. And then I guess, so we are helping keep us on time. Sure. We are about 2 more minutes left for this question. Are there any other thoughts or things you want to add about what?
Just related to smartwatches, even though it's not necessarily answering that question. I know some of the principals include, like,
Process that we've done.
Douglas Elementary School, where my son goes,
What
no
expectations
smartwatches.
of
Do
children.
not have a kid. They are a reminder, like, they're a distraction, don't bring a smartwatch to school.
Might rebel.
And I know, like, Fairfax County, their policy addresses smartwatches. And one thing that I'm not sure we're answering with these, but I think that ours, I would like us to look at our technology policy. I think is really super long. And like blocking out cell phone policy. If there's an AI policy, put that over here, because
I wrote a paper on it.
this is a policy families are going to look for.
12 minutes in, we're going to have 2 more sets of 12 minutes. and then
Would
we'll come back again.
you be open to opening technology policy that has like 3 parts? under
Whatever
one?
makes it easy for families to find.
Right.
That's one of them.
AUP, that's,
Way, and it doesn't have to be like.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
So
would respect
the
that.
AUP, which is the acceptable use policy of technology, is very generic and very broad.
Where it's about.
But within that, there could be some specific policies like the cell phone,
But if we
the
can
AI,
see what other districts have
which is
done.
much more detailed.
See, here's a district maybe that's done.
I don't know how
it a long way,
we, but anyways, we can talk about that. That's,
Yeah, and my other concern,
Community engagement committee.
yeah,
I think this
and
would
I'm,
be a
and I'm.
great topic for us to really move around the district. Because what I'm concerned about is we're going to use the same voices, and we're going to neglect a lot of voices that may not be able to drop to
Yeah.
So, okay, so the next question,
Yeah.
we need
So if we
to
can
take a look, I don't know if you have notes or you have access to your screen, but like those understanding
taking us across the
8
district.
things. I wrote them down.
Really good input, and I think that data would look
Focused
different.
attention is essential
Are you saying for
effective
the
learning.
policy in general, or like the whole
Because
tech policy,
schools are
or
actively
This
for
time.
the self, this topic? Got it, thank you, just wanted to.
Cell phones also should remain out of sight and of use during instructional time. Any policy will account for appropriate exceptions. The policy will likely vary from grade to grade. Enforcement will be challenging. Policy
Slides,
alone is not a complete solution.
9 and
And
10,
then policy will need regular time.
not 9 and 10. I've got some, I got a printout too. I thought.
I think that
To create the policy.
we have to get away from, once we have kind of one devices, there shouldn't be a
So
situation.
I have a couple that I have some concerns about. That second one, WCSF schools are actively addressing use of cell phones. I don't know
Now
if
you get into
that's
banning.
going on. I've had BAC, where we had all the different principals come in and all talks about, we show them the district policy, school policies, and so many schools from grade level to grade level, have very
If I
different
taught high
ways.
school, I might have had 80, well,
And
30,
then
40 credits in
that goes to the third one, cell phone devices should remain out of sight and unused during instructional time. I believe that, but what I've seen is a lot of schools only have half of that.
we're
They
saying
say that the devices should be out of sight. And so future lawyers out there among the students will just say, well, you didn't see my phone, but I had my earbuds in, I was, listening to music, or I
then
could
folks have a
have
smartphone.
been, scrolling stuff where they think, well, if the teacher doesn't see it, I can still use it. And so that's sort of where, if we mean
I think
we
this will
don't
be a very
use it,
difficult policy for us to really
I think that goes back into
my personal
our slide again. I want
connected, so if I lose my phone or don't have my phone, I can still text from it. So the distraction is still there if that's what we're trying to
want to get into
eliminate.
enforcement for making
They
sure
have
that policy,
personal computer.
or how they
Some do
They do.
write down.
Some students do, even though it's not a full BYOD,
are right or wrong.
large
If we're talking about
instances
well-being
where
and
the students bring their own
because
personal
the other thing that I
MacBooks,
think that we also
connect to
sometimes
Wi-Fi, but again, they're restricted to what they can do and everything, but they can, right now, everything is on the cloud, so
It's
they
not
can
like that. When we take into account the differentiation in learning
nationally, and the reality is, going back to our
child, it could be a student that is literally,
7, 8 years
and we have special education
in
here,
some cases, kids don't.
that has something they listen to, or tap
Now,
into, can focus
the district
better.
provides those devices, so in terms of access to
And a
content,
student with ADHD cannot sit with nothing.
that's
and that's
allowed.
why I think having these
Consider
conversations.
how that, if that
But I also would like
Well, that
to
gets to the,
recognize
to the understanding number 8, is that
difference, I
this
think,
policy is going to
between
require
where you
regular
have
updates, just
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
evolution and
Yeah.
sounds
everything,
really
not just the
distracting.
technology
Maybe
evolution.
use white
Which is
noise
understanding
or
that
like some soft music or something. I think that's one
is a
thing.
broad
But then
community.
there's also students that
Society.
security,
To
they
some
do a
degree.
lot of
first one,
things
focused
to be.
attention is essential
Yeah.
for
So to
learning,
answer your
that are like actively
bottom
playing.
line question of
class.
number 2,
I'm
I
not trying
don't
to
have
punish the kid, but I
the
think
8
they should be
understanding.
focused on the classroom lesson. And that's where I'd just like to see 2 and 3, those understandings.
I think what you have to plan to parse out with the third survey is there is a different perception
The
of
third blanket of the classroom.
among what we've heard so far among teachers versus students about how it being an educational, a phone being an educational tool. So for teachers, here, it's like, they have their devices, they can use it, but for students, they think of it as an educational tool. So I think there's going to have to be, we'll have to think about that.
That we're,
This
and
process is different from elementary to middle school to high school. I think elementary school, I have to take a stronger restrictive stance than I would for middle school. And I'm wondering if those students know how to get through all the different types of technology guardrails we have up, but are we able to, tighten up the security on the Wi-Fi, what they have
It's
access
an
to?
ongoing process. Obviously, we're never going to say that it's absolutely
that shows
right.
that is not
We're
understood.
continuously tweaking it. I think it's pretty good,
And
but again,
so
it's still.
to that point,
Because I know
Yeah.
there's like.
that's why, and
there's
there's
so many different
legitimate
things that
viewpoints on both sides of
people
this.
access.
But I believe that you do need to have a district policy
I was
that creates
address that when
enough
you say vary by
standardization
grade
so that
level, I would make
every
it
family, every parent, every student has a certain level of expectation. It might vary from classroom to classroom, and that's within
Well,
the discretion.
there was a school that we heard, I can't remember off the top of my head, that had
there's
differences in
certain
ninth and 10th.
base
and
level
11th.
lines that if one teacher is.
And then there were differences
forcing
in
it
elementary schools between K through 2 and 3 through 5. So that's interesting.
Then that goes back to
But, right, so that's an interesting, thank you.
then it can go back to that increase. At this school, that's
For
not
us, for our district, our size, is everybody
Yeah,
understands
to do
elementary, yes.
I'm starting with something like a bell-to-bell policy, silence and put it away. I mean, you'll always have the exceptions. That's specific.
Leadership Academy.
And the reason why
Have like a bell-to-bell policy, it's like
we have
everybody
a
knows.
policy
Every teacher,
specific
every
to middle
person,
school,
every
Right.
parent knows that.
specific to high
This is the
school, and we have
expectation from the top,
schools
from the top.
if I'm a teacher, how am I navigating?
We'll
have to think about that, right? KA leadership.
Yeah, but couldn't,
Leadership academies, they're based on applications, so I'm wondering if we can put in the applications, you are agreeing to this, this is an understanding.
I think also the principles, like Mariah at the Leadership Academy, it's the same from 6 to 12. We give the principals, so we have our policy.
And what that means.
As long as it's not an
Not just out of sight, but also addressing the
I'm
idea.
okay with being.
The unused, if you
Like,
have
don't
a
have your-
population, that's that number 4, any policy without appropriate exceptions, but just
That
differentiate.
at the moment, I think that's maybe at some point,
Something
but I
like
do
you said,
think
necessary for
currently,
health.
this is going to be new.
Versus, well, I finished early and I want to put forth.
Something new to Wake County, it takes a while for folks to,
Yeah, that's
you know,
something too.
digest it, understand it, so I think putting another layer on top of the policy that we don't quite know what is going to look like, the implications of it.
Right.
Because again,
Maybe a little bit more, may cause more harm.
To me, that goes back to the first question.
some kids, especially your AIG
So
kids,
it may be a new
they're
policy
finished before everybody else.
for practical purposes.
You'll always have the teacher that allows it, like.
That's a big number. That's
It's
the
like you have things that they
So with
can.
regard to those special schools,
but I-
is the academies, or like we have 1K, we only have 1K, right?
Right, so that's part of, yeah.
That we could have some,
Because I do fall on
those special schools with those split,
less of
or
that
combined
discretion,
grade
because
levels
otherwise
rather,
you get this
that
teacher,
perhaps the
let's
middle
just do everything
could
this teacher
apply
does,
to
do nothing.
grades 6 through 8, and the high school
And
will
then,
help,
then
you know what I
especially
mean,
if
would
it breaks
apply,
down,
even within
some
the same
students get
building.
it,
I would still like to see that
don't.
in their application.
It's just
so
easier to say.
therefore,
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
no surprise,
Yeah.
it's clear,
Will organically happen. Yeah, and then there's.
but I agree.
Yeah, and then it goes, what does that learning look like?
Elementary and secondary to keep it simpler. Fix every.
So I can say,
We address all the understandings that we bring
oh, no, I said I was going to. Share the ones that he was.
Argument or
Remember the last says this policy are regular updates on
I agree.
That is my favorite.
I'm looking at you as a policy chair, if you could come back to give updates every 90 days to kind of see
What
what's,
specific input are
you
you
know, what's working, what's not working.
educators that needs to be addressed by the district?
Started in the fall.
Early in
Once
the-
we
yeah.
started this, those were your houses.
Personal device
Yeah.
policy.
Maybe there is a process to, once this policy rolls out, maybe send out a survey to really get the feedback. And probably from the educators, what is working, what's not working.
Yeah.
Right, get that feedback and continue to tweak that.
Yeah.
Headphones and AirPods.
Yeah, so really students are more in tune than what we think. And we have
Because
to
you can have
like
your,
we said
I can put my phone away and have
95% of
it.
Well, some students,
right?
I have kids who
A little
not even the AirPods, but just headphones.
Yeah, now, if it's in there,
that I hear
you know,
say,
that's, those are kind of, hey, there's always exceptions.
and it's
But
correct.
They don't want it, because they will start just putting in.
Let's make sure we have a clear, consistent understanding of what is cell phones.
Because you also have to
Some personal electronic devices, including cell phones, earphones, watches,
And
smart
dividing
watches.
them all, you know, I mean, saying the difference between a smartphone and a
policy
cell,
that maybe
you know,
defines some of them.
yeah, we gotta name it all. It's-
In here, we're gonna have another.
That's why every year.
You gotta watch it now. You could just-
That's right.
You got glasses.
Yeah, we don't never have to have
You gotta have glasses on.
Doesn't that make go? I feel so out of
That
place.
guy in New Orleans
glasses
used
to
those.
me.
Did you see that?
Banned. Oh, yeah, banned. If you have a camera like your glasses, banned. You cannot bring them on campus.
And make it
And that is where we
tell us what, as a board, I challenge you not to look at your phones.
you know, there are other policies to
so
address that
that-
exist with bullying.
That is
Point is the
something,
maturity
I would
and
all these
the
distractions, when we're concise with this
School
policy.
training
That's the first, do you want to address
to put those
use
to work
in the workforce, allow for other policies perhaps to
so I'll
address.
take that challenge. I'll take that
I
challenge.
can't do it because my
Because-
life and work is centered around it.
But it is something that I'll just share my personal
Policy is
testimony.
consistent in all
Is that I've been in a situation where
I'm
I've
supposed
left the phone at home and had to go somewhere.
So I
Or
also
it's been out there and I not charging, I can't charge it.
Something that would
The
fit.
difference that freedom, that breaking that tether creates, I think is good for law enforcement, right? And I think that, while I don't want to punish someone for looking at that, and again, there's a difference between flipping a phone and just checking it and actively playing a game like
Right.
texting friends, you know, in terms of breaking that distraction,
think-
so much of what we've seen
think
from
we know
the
this, but we're not
clinical
big.
psychologists, those that study the student brain activity, and especially around student media,
exceptions,
is
whether
that
it's
notification, that reward action, that stimulus
Concerns about
reaction.
that, yeah.
And that's what, you know, oh, someone liked that, oh, someone posted that. That's what's constantly drawing
But
their
I'm
attention away.
actually,
And so
I've
I
heard more
think the
from
more that
me
we can do to give
my
them a
district, I've
break,
heard more
even
support
if they don't
for
have
us
those
to do
breaks at home,
something.
giving that
Implement
break
something.
during that study period, I think
Then-
that's going to have better health benefits and give them more,
people go and know.
again, with accommodations, but more focus for their learning.
they
And then,
want something.
when that bell rings and they're out in between classes, they can check, they can get back
I'm
on.
in agreement, I'm in line with it.
And I think
But that's
They
okay, I want to say
schools
that was one day that you forgot your
point
phone.
that Tyler raised.
Try it for 120.
About the added
They gotta be
burden of
comfortable.
classroom teachers.
That's our time.
This is
That's
anecdotal, but Cheryl and I, when
That's
we were
our
at
time.
the School
We're
Board
talking about
Association
children
conference, went to that workshop, and I believe it was Cumberland
Part
County.
of their life. This is real life.
And they
not
used the
some. We are
pouches.
talking about the parents who are
So it was not the schools,
We kind of go, this was Cumberland children are.
Oh, Cumberland, sorry.
the district, I heard district, yeah, but that's okay. It was not
As a
the
junior?
device people, so they weren't there for a sales pitch, but they were
So
talking
let
about,
me
you know, the
propose this to
successes
both
that
of
they've
you.
had, they really like
I think,
it.
you know, you're coming at it from different but equally
Say
valid
it's working well, but
perspectives.
one of
Should
the
this
points
be
they
some of the
made,
information
their
that we're
concern,
collecting,
and I agree with you,
hearing from parents
was that
about what
It
that
is.
the way that
you
they're
said,
implementing it
because if you're
is
trying to
if a
develop a
classroom
policy,
teacher
again,
has an issue
like if we
with
were to say, hey,
phone,
starting
all
Monday, no phones,
administration
trying to get people to bake their turkeys.
does not
chaos,
take away the
Right,
phone or get into
But
the thing.
what are expectations?
Administration is really
If
the
people
one
do
that's
come from different levels of exposure, let's
so
not
that's how they're trying to
prejudge it, but let's see. You know, we know our own expectations, but are we the exception?
call on a classroom
Or are
teacher.
we
Any
kind of like the
ever-go
standout?
pouches?
That would be something to sort of bring in.
I would like to make a point, you know,
Oh, yeah,
when we
and they
consider
do.
It calls to the students. I'm just thinking if you have some
No,
PTAs that would want to step up and fill in the gap.
yeah.
You
Right.
have some that
Right.
do not have that PTA. So I do think if that's the key.
Patterns are forming as they're growing. So if we're showing them there's a time and a place, which there is for everything in life, we as adults know
I
that.
think
So
there's
when we're sitting and
there's different types of
work, whatever it
technology
is,
that
we
you
know
can
that.
use. The pouches as
In
well.
school,
Yeah, I mean,
There's a magnetic
and they're
lock.
home and they have off.
You can also have
So if that's what they're doing and they're off time, that's fine.
cell,
But in school, they're
signal
there specifically to
reduction
learn. We
during
pick them up and then we drop
times.
them off because we take them in.
My high school, it was like that.
Having
It
that
was
distraction, which we
only in the commons.
is,
Is where
could be
they
detrimental to that
have
kid who
access
can't
to.
regulate, who hasn't
they're called
figured
light phones.
who is getting distracted from getting that education.
Basically debilitated the capacity
that buzz.
of social media.
What-
Yeah, let's
what I'd
make
like
it
to
clear,
do-
we're not
Basically,
saying,
can call out and call in.
just so to clear for us, we're having the disagreement in
processes. Let me clarify.
One of
I
the
am
principal
advocating for a student to have their cell phone
they
in
have
class.
currently have a
Let's make sure we understand.
Said in
I don't allow my
Ohio,
children to do it.
they-
I'm not saying any of our
governor
students
signed a bill saying
need to do it. What I am saying
And the
is how
union,
we're talking about having them. I think that's
specifically
common
in their
sense
contract got it so
to
cell phones,
understand
there would be no cell phones.
should have a cell phone during instruction.
And to that point,
Yeah, that
like
makes.
when we talk about the policy, we also,
So that's what the
this is
state
a little bit off, but I
No, this was her district.
Note that we come back
This
to
is where she was
it.
coming
What is the
from.
expectation for
That's what they
staff?
did.
Because we have teachers that are on TikTok that are
generally what I
filming
hear.
during the school day, during class. You know, when the School Board Association is looking at doing a public education campaign, all the advertisers are like, oh, you gotta have influencers.
Charlotte
And here's some of the best influencers in Wake County. Wake County teachers that
So
are
Charlotte Mac
broadcasting
has,
social
Wake
media
County
posts.
Salem has.
direct from- And maybe there's merit
A
to
lot of
it.
them
But we ought to have, we
have
ought to
teacher
think about that in
discretion.
policy.
With exceptions.
And are there boundaries? What's
But it
acceptable,
says,
what's
for
not
example, the
acceptable?
CMS
Would you like to
policy
see your
is
child
that
on somebody
allows
else's social
teachers
media
and
channel
interested.
without your
I would be
consent?
pretty restricted.
Right, and just sort of what those are. And I'm not proposing a solution, I just want to get that on there to look at. Now,
Calls them on Zoom.
specific to this, what specific input are you hearing
Not
from
allowed
parents that
lunches.
needs to be addressed?
That's still-
So I want to make
High
sure
school
we
kids
get
can
to
be-
this.
So everyone has the chance
One
to
of the
go to
things,
school.
like I hear from parents on both sides, don't you dare take those phones away.
Like,
You need to get those
never-
phones out.
like on elementary
all the time.
school,
You know,
doesn't
to
come
me,
out.
I hear more 2-to-1, you know, for taking them out, but I might hear
Social
from
interaction and what I've
20
heard.
parents out of 160,000 students, right? So you always have to
Start talking to
stop
each other.
and put the numbers in
Now in
perspective.
high school, they're gonna,
Right, just because you hear from some people doesn't mean that's
they're
what
all gonna
everyone
get, that's
thinks.
different. But I
One
think
thing
it
I
can-
worry about,
probably- It'll be, it can be a little different between
of
middle
restriction, but I immediately qualified that by saying I don't think it's a valid sample size.
And I think you should.
Using that as an example, that I think any survey needs to be more.
I
than
agree in
just-
high school completely.
Well, it's
Right.
also the middle school
But for
thing,
this one, a
isn't it? Because
specific
a lot of
thing
kids
that I
are
hear,
getting phones.
that I worry
So
about
It's going to be an interesting discussion.
contact my son or my
Or
daughter
the middle school
during an
piece.
emergency.
My son is not.
And I'm not committed to any one,
But that creates
Yeah, I wanna
as
hear.
many security and safety
I'm really interested in
concerns. Like when you had a television reporter that was conducting an interview with a student inside
because
the
they're the ones
building.
that have to, go ahead.
Right?
To your question
When
about North
anybody
Carolina, we've
listening or
actually
watching
contact and-
on the feed
been aware
could then see inside the
School
building.
psychology
And how do we
actually have
address anxiety and concern over student
It's
safety
called Project Smile,
with
but they've apparently
just
partnered with
looking
some
to
districts.
keep students safe
State on
in a situation like
a
that?
lot of research.
And that's going to be one that the experts
gathered
might
as
tell
part
us
of that
one
work
thing,
in terms of
but
just digital
parents,
learning,
you know, going from their heart are going to tell us something else. And I don't know how we reconcile that.
and the digital interplay.
Yeah,
So we can reach out to them and see what districts they work with and what they work.
That'd be great. We're talking how you can get a feel
Yeah.
for parents' perspective, chat them, but I think too,
I did bring
what
this
your,
today, so we were talking
just
about it.
the districts that have put in some.
Yeah.
I think everybody was opposed to our.
The districts that have put in, we'll speak to them, see how things are.
You know, how couches, right, so nobody reached 100% of the thing, which is good because it's fiscal responsibility. But I think taking the
They
responsibility
have
on the
different
teachers is the
from
biggest thing. Some parents now.
elementary, middle, and high school are all different.
Graduated approach.
Property, you know, it was more about what if there's stuck in a situation.
I had emailed on my different,
Bullying, for example, they can't reach out to somebody.
Yeah.
You know, so I understand that having that, and that's why I feel like a bell to bell, because when the bell rings and you're in classroom, you're with the teacher. So you should be safe in that classroom.
They had all the exceptions.
Once you're out of the classroom, it's kind of like free reign. So I kind of understand that. And then the other thing was, you know, if you take it away, you don't have as much bullying. So it's kind of like your cousins would bully,
I actually went to Glasgow Middle
they're not on the
School.
device to do it.
Yeah, so,
If you take-
but they, now they have K through 6
Most of
elementary
the
too.
bullying stuff happens when you see it in
But like, you can wear a watch, but you gotta turn off that
It's
stuff.
online.
I mean, they're not,
It's online, from home, Well, if you
Different they're doing
talk
us.
about taking over, I want to
Now, their
clarify, we're not,
governor,
we can't take away anybody's device that another adult purchases.
is
We're talking about
basically put in for
how
a
it's
ban.
utilized in the 6 hours.
Like an executive, I don't know if he did executive order.
Right.
I think it was an executive order.
You can't, bullying is going to take place on electronic devices, on social media, and has nothing to do with
I think they
community.
reference
That's
like
Fairfax County, yeah.
Right, and people all of a sudden tell everybody, because we've seen this
Yes.
happen.
Well, yeah, well, we know that they do that. I don't think, because even with bell to bell, you're still going to get the same concern about a phone.
I don't think their point was it would 100% stop bullying. I would think their point was that it would have,
Get there,
it would stop
going to the
bullying.
bathroom, taking it back.
You wouldn't have kids going to the
I
bathroom.
don't
I'm open to whatever, I agree.
Need a lot verbalized in
Because-
classrooms. and
Go back to
have
understanding 7. Cell phone.
Meet up somewhere, do whatever. I'm just thinking about my
It's not a
experience.
complete
Yeah.
solution.
Because
It's a step.
But this is something too that, I'm gonna just claim I don't have enough knowledge or expertise. I only have anecdotal stuff and personal experience. And so seeing what has gone on in districts, has it helped? Has it had no impact?
Yeah.
That should be something we should be able to start to track. Do incidents of bullying go up? Do they go down, or are they unchanged? And it may be,
I mean, how many times did you
We already
see
sort of have some things
videotaping
going on.
other kids?
Different.
It's like, it was almost like arranged, because how
But
did
you-
you have your cell phone out to catch something
But the
like
bullying
that?
happens still even in the classroom verbally, because that's where it takes place first.
I don't think
It
it's a
verbalizes,
one-shot
it
deal.
verbalizes.
Fairfax, so it's silence,
So we're still dealing
way,
with,
a little way short
we
of
still have strong, the reason why.
And that's from the district level versus this, like, discretion, that's a whole district.
Fairfax County.
Longevity data.
And I don't know if that's,
Bullying is such a major issue.
go ahead.
This is anecdotal, but I've gotten a lot of consensus from elementary level parents that they're
I
not.
think it's much easier.
But,
I think that students are
Those are the ones that
utilize a cell phone.
told me their kids didn't even have one yet.
Yeah.
I mean, just at the elementary level, so I don't think it would
Share at any time.
That's
I
again,
think the most resistance
By
we're
the time
going
they
to
get home, that's the only place they have access to.
I
Or
actually.
maybe
give-
not, resistance might not be the right word, but
Yeah.
If it happened at school,
the most nuanced.
they don't tell everybody.
I think as long as they can access it after
So whether we hold it off at school,
transportation
we're
and
still going to see
what's going on, I
points.
think that takes
And the other part is, what do we
bell-to-bell
Our
aspect,
citizens can say something, what's the number?
middle school.
I'll add one thing. I love
That
that
they
y'all
we're putting in place to
added
make
in the understandings
quickly share what it is. And I think it just goes back again to,
the cell phone policy is not a
I don't
complete
want us to be
solution,
blindsided.
because it really is
What did you just show
bigger
us?
conversation, right?
Right. I don't want us to be blinded to thinking our decision-making and creating this policy. Right.
Right, and for children.
I don't think anybody that just knows this entirely.
I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And some adults that probably would benefit from some of that proactive support.
Yeah, they're challenging
And
to
our
run into.
sight in the classroom. Only, but I don't think it's going to affect
My biggest,
Well, we have that issue now with other policies, right? I mean, with all these different kinds of, however many classrooms we have across.
But honestly, when it goes out,
thank you.
and we didn't have a cell phone to tune anything, we just tuned together.
Thank you.
Sitting down is as tall as I am standing up.
He knows.
Do me a lot of good these days.
Dr. Robinson, I'm going to slide down so you can sit in a wheelchair. No, there you go. I don't slow it down now. Don't make me slide to it back.
All right, thank you, everybody. I want to be mindful of time because I know we have a full meeting, but I would love to just offer a short amount of time for reflections from groups around the three questions. If there were particular things that came out in your conversation that you wanted to highlight as you sort of think about and make these decisions. I just wanted to open it up to the group for a short reflection, and then I'll close us out with just our process and timeline. So I'll just open it up to the group for any particular reflections that came out of your conversations. I know we got a lot of very great, very helpful stuff down.
I think we're really interested, since a lot of schools are already doing things, we're really interested to hear how they're basically pilot programs going on all over the county.
Yep.
And how many schools are already doing something, what are they doing, what are the results? I think that's huge.
That was a big part. I think we wanted to add students
We did.
to understanding, I think it was 7.
Yep.
And that was a big part of our conversation.
Anybody else?
I mean, we gave a lot. There's a bunch.
Yeah,
Yeah, no,
we
totally.
gave a ton.
It was great. And I think that the feedback was
30 more minutes.
super, super helpful. And I'll just kind of to close this out, I'll go through, our sort of timeline for what we plan to do. And in essence, I think, we're going to ask the questions to gather student, staff, and family input on the current use of school-issued devices. We talked less about that today. And then we want to develop a very clear understanding of the instructional functions that need to be met. And this is really thinking about the second part of the work about the instructional devices. On cell phones, I think a lot of what we have planned, I think what you guys provided feedback on will help us be even more detailed about this, but we want to gather student, staff, and family feedback about the current use of cell phones and personal devices to inform our policy. So I think, to what Mr. Hershey said, I think that's exactly right. We've already done a cursory scan of middle and high schools, so we're going to do some work to verify that. But we definitely want to know actually Wake County input. The second thing is to use comparable cell phone and personal device policies for other districts. Again, we've begun to collect some of those things. I think, Winston-Salem, I know, has done that. CMS has done that. So we'll get some information about what other districts are doing. And then set up a set of considerations that we'll use as we put the policy together. And in terms of timeline, I think we are right, kind of in the staging process right now. I think this feedback you all have provided is very, very helpful. Throughout the next couple of months, we're going to be conducting feedback sessions across the district to sort of identify trends, and then moving into March and April. And I think we plan to probably use a combination of policy meetings and work sessions to think through bringing this together. I think we're going to do some sense making with what you guys have done today. I think the one big thing that I believe we all sort of collectively agree with is that bold thing highlighted in phase 2, that we expect the board to discuss and vote on a cell phone and personal device policy this spring to be operational in 25-26. That feels like a very important goal. Obviously, what's contained within that is we have to figure that out collectively together. But that is the goal we are driving for, which means that we have enough time, but a brisk timeline to make sure that schools are ready to align their practices with the policy. So with that, if there's any other questions, I would turn it over to the chair.
So, thank you. I do have, yes, I see Ms. Rice. I do have a question too, though. I do want to talk about the timeline and going back to the original one. And it's just one opinion, but my opinion is that policy around tech use does not necessarily need to be delayed until the 26-27 school year. And I know that this needs to be the priority because we want to get all the feedback, develop a reasonable policy, and then make sure there's enough notice to parents and staff that we can be prepared for it. But there are some other important issues regarding tech that I think we may have time to address between now and that 26-27 school year, specifically around how tech is used in the classroom for instructional purposes, looking at expected access. Do we have students using, for example, applications on Chromebooks that might require two-factor authorization, but then we restrict cell phone use so then they can't authorize what we've told them to use, and just avoiding those types of unanticipated conflicts. We can get ahead of that by looking at that now. I still think using technology to hand in and turn in assignments remotely, we really need to look at the deadlines. And it's, again, just a personal belief, but having midnight deadlines for turning in assignments does encourage students staying up late or turning them in. I don't want to penalize a student by giving them less time, but I don't want them online longer than they need to be at night when we know for their health they need to get as much sleep and as rest as they can. And then looking at staff use of technology and mobile use themselves, whether it's instructional use, which is perfectly appropriate, but also if it's personal use during school hours and instructional time. So those are just some things that are concurrent, or not concurrent, adjacent to these important issues, but I hope we could look at them before that 26-27. Thank you.
Yeah, I got it. That makes total sense. And the 26-27 is really about provision, right? But I think to your point, you're talking about use and guidance.
Yes, sir. Okay. Ms. Rice.
Thank you, Chair Heckerty. I just have two questions. One, with your conduction of focus groups, I'm curious at what the samples are going to look like of the people that you're going to use for focus groups. Are we using the focus groups of all parents across, or bodies of people across the district? Are we only sharing or putting a net with a certain group of people? I'm concerned about what does that look like when you're saying you're choosing the focus groups. I need to know a little bit more clarity about who are you choosing in your focus groups to see what your samples actually look like. That was something that I would really like to know specifically, to make sure that we're hearing the right voices across the district, which is everyone's voice, and a sample of that. And the other thing that I have a question about is, sorry, I lost my thought. The listening opportunity. So I guess it's one and the same. It's kind of the same question and all, which is, I'm more concerned about the deployment of the district-wide survey. Oh, that's what it was that I had the question about, the survey. In the past, I've seen our surveys from the district, and it's really a guiding answer to what we want to hear. And I need to kind of know what are these surveys really going to look like, and asking a question that doesn't kind of guide to what we want to hear. But is it a real survey that's going to allow people to really share with what they want? And I know that's very hard and technical sometimes, but whoever is creating the survey, I don't know how you do it and develop it together as a team of people, or whoever. Is it one person? Is it a group of people? And then of that group of people, what does your diversity look like? What does your mindset look like? What does your level of expertise look like? So you can be able to ask and form the questions. So it's not saying that people can't do the job. I just need to know who's putting it together, because what I've seen in the past as a district and as a parent who has to answer these questions is very specific, which doesn't really give you my thoughts, but it guides you to what you want me to tell you as a district that you want to hear. And so I'm concerned about those.
So if I can build on that, and then specifically, Ms. Rice, is this something that you would be interested in? And I'm going to look to Dr. Robinson and staff as well, Dr. Wilson, Norman as well, but Dr. Robinson and Ms. Rice, because of our Community Engagement Committee. Mm-hmm. Would this be an appropriate topic to bring to community engagement to really do a deeper dive on how we do the surveys, methods of that data collection, and kind of what best practices are, and then suggestions for improvement? This could even be something where, if we're going remotely, this could be a topic we take out to the community. Is that anything you'd be interested in?
I think that's an excellent suggested idea.
Ms. Edmonds?
I just wanted to say that Mr. Swanson raised that exact point in our small group, was that it should go to the Community Engagement Committee.
Well, thank you. Great minds.
And we concurred.
And we can handle it, can't we, Dr. Robinson?
We got it.
All right.
All right. See, we're already taking steps. All right. Other questions for specifically related to the agenda, the timeline, process, anything like that? Ms. Caulfield, or did you just?
I mean, we had our input. I'm not sure, I guess, we'll get a consensus of how's that going to come
So
back to us?
talk to us a little bit about kind of, we have 3 groups, 3 or 4 that have worked together to produce some thoughts on this. Will there be a report out? Will we be able to see what the other groups talked about?
Yeah, well, I think we definitely come back in March with that information. And then, I think to build consensus, I think, we want to pretty quickly move to a draft policy, right? Because that is the heart of where we're headed to. So I think we imagine both for sort of sense-making with the feedback that you all have given, returning that in March, and then I think pretty quickly beginning to think about, with the feedback that we've gathered, what a policy might look like, and then have a lot of discussions about that.
So are you saying that you'll have a proposed policy draft in March, or we'll just be speaking about it again in March?
I think what we're saying is, as we look at the scheduled meetings, that we'll look at in between policy and work sessions, how to bring back what you talked about today. In March, the collection of what did the community say, what did students say, and then, based upon that, here's a policy. But in between that, we heard, we want to hear what we already have in place across schools. We need to bring that back. We want to hear what are other large districts doing. We talked about North Carolina, but we've looked at districts across the nation. And so we want to bring that back. And so we will just begin to look at mapping out what can we bring back between each meeting to keep you abreast of the work that's going on. March is kind of the page in which we like to have a draft policy to make sure that schools have enough time to make whatever adjustments. But we have, based on your feedback today, we have some things to bring back to you to help you before we get to the policy decisions.
So, Dr. Wilson, can we do this? So I think that progression that they're talking about is absolutely where we want to be. But if you're interested in what the other 2 groups said for this exercise, I think that's something we can probably lift up pretty quickly and share with you all. So at least you will know, and that will keep us on the other timeline as well. Would that be, it's kind of what you're asking for, what the other, okay.
Ms. Hoffeld, you had a final thought?
Yeah, and when you're reaching out to the public, I'm just curious, are you going to, I think it was more along the lines of what Ms. Rice was saying, are you going to have like specific questions or things that you're going to ask them? And are you going to give them scenarios that they could answer? Because the public might not necessarily have an answer, but they might have an opinion, if that makes sense. Like, if we were to say, how would you feel about a bell-to-bell policy? Like if we were to give them certain examples, they might be able to give us some really good feedback with that.
We will have questions, and we have some researchers, and I think they're looking at surveys that have been done other places and focus groups so that it can, to your point, not be leading, but we can create whatever we want. But trying to look at a baseline of surveys that have been deployed other places, and then working with our research department to think about how can we do it internally within Wake.
And I think definitely for the focus groups, we want to start first with non-leading questions, open-ended questions that are about exactly the stuff we talked about today. How are cell phones affecting instruction, your students' lives, and get that feedback. And then I do think the survey, I think we will need to narrow some questions because it will get into specific things about, like the decisions that we need to make about when and where. So I think we'll have components of the survey, we'll ask pretty specific questions. And because, to think about representation, we also want, if you haven't participated in one of the focus groups and you are taking the survey, we want to know what you think. So there will definitely be an open-ended set of questions where, folks will be able to respond as well.
Okay, great. And, I'd invite all of you, if you come across articles you've read, feedback from parents. I know we've had this topic come up in BAC meetings. There's been conferences we've attended. Just feel free to share that information among yourselves now so that everyone has access to the information. We can all see some of those issues, and we'll go into March the best prepared for it. Okay? All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we'll call this work session to a close. Before we do we have a motion?
We want to go into closed session.
We have a couple items we could address between now and the meeting.
A motion to go into closed session to consider personal information protected under GS 143-318.11A6 and 115C
Perfect. Good enough. So we have a motion for Mr. Hershey to move into closed session, second for Ms. Mahaffey. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we'll give the room a minute to clear, and then we'll move into closed session.